She looked me in the eye and said, "You're not allowed here." I smiled and answered, "Then throw me on your bed." Neither of us knew it, but that was the moment everything between us began to change. I still remember the way she looked at me that night, like I was someone she shouldn't let in, but couldn't quite push away either. The hallway light above us flickered softly, casting her face in shadows and gold. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed over her chest, her whole body tense in a way that didn't match the calm steadiness of her voice. "You're not allowed here," she said. It wasn't just the words. It was the way she said them, measured, careful, as though she was rehearsing a line she had told herself 100 times before. Her tone was meant to sound final, but her eyes gave her away. They lingered on me for a second too long, and in that pause, I saw hesitation. The narrow space between us seemed alive with something I couldn't name. Maybe it was the faint trace of her perfume drifting toward me, something soft, floral, grounded with warmth. Maybe it was the way her hand rested against the wood of the doorframe, fingers curling as though she needed something solid to hold herself steady. Whatever it was, it made the air feel heavy, charged. I let her words hang there for a moment. Most men would have taken them as a warning, turned away with a nod, and respected the invisible wall she had drawn. But I wasn't most men, and something in me knew she didn't want me to be. So I smiled, not cocky, not careless, but with the kind of quiet defiance that comes when you know you're walking into dangerous territory and you're willing to take the risk. "Then throw me on your bed," I said softly. The words slipped out almost playfully, but the silence that followed wasn't playful at all. Her lips parted slightly as though to answer, but nothing came. She just looked at me, surprised, conflicted, maybe even a little shaken. For a moment I wondered if I'd gone too far. But then, I noticed something. Her hand, still pressed against the doorframe, trembled ever so slightly. Not with anger, not with rejection, but with the kind of nervous energy that mirrored my own heartbeat pounding in my chest. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. The tension stretched, thin and fragile, yet unbearably real. I could feel the night air behind me, cool, restless, urging me to leave. But everything inside her home, the soft glow of lamplight spilling past her shoulder, the faint sound of a kettle whistling somewhere in the background, the warmth radiating from within, pulled me closer, like a gravity I couldn't resist. She finally shook her head, as though trying to gather back her strength, her composure. But the hesitation lingered in her eyes, and that was all I needed to know. In that doorway, with her words still echoing in my ears and my challenge hanging in the air between us, something shifted. The rules she had tried to lay down, the distance she wanted to keep, they were already unraveling, thread by delicate thread. And I knew then, the night was only just beginning. She didn't answer me right away. For a moment, it felt like time itself hesitated with her, like the night was holding its breath. Her lips parted, her brows drew together, and I could almost see the argument happening silently behind her eyes. She wanted to say no. She wanted to stand her ground. But she didn't. Instead, she did something far more telling. She stepped back. Just one small step, enough to leave the doorway open, enough to let me in. It wasn't permission spoken aloud. It was a dare wrapped in silence. And I took it. Crossing that threshold felt heavier than it should have, like I was stepping into something I couldn't walk back from. Her shoulder brushed mine as I passed, the faintest touch, but it sent a charge through me. It wasn't just skin-grazing fabric, it was her warmth, her nearness, the unspoken weight of her letting me cross a line she swore she'd drawn. The air inside her home wrapped around me like a blanket. Soft lamplight pooled across the floor, painting everything in shades of amber and shadow. Somewhere in the background, an old radio hummed low, the faint crackle of static between songs. The scent of her lingered everywhere, something floral and warm, mixed with the faint aroma of tea steeping in the kitchen. I glanced back at her as she closed the door behind me. She didn't meet my eyes. Her hand lingered on the doorknob, fingers tightening before she let go, as if she was still deciding whether to lock herself away from me or from what she felt. She walked past me, her steps deliberate, measured. I could feel her trying to project composure, but I caught the way her hands smoothed over the sides of her cardigan, the nervous fidget disguised as casual movement. She settled into a chair across the room, sitting upright, almost too upright, like she was bracing herself. I stayed standing for a moment, letting the quiet stretch between us. Then I sat down on the couch, close enough to be within her space but far enough to respect the invisible line she was still clinging to. Did I cross a line? I asked softly, my tone careful, searching. Her eyes flicked up at mine, sharp at first, then softening almost instantly. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she tilted her head, studying me as though she was trying to decide what I truly meant by the question. And maybe she was right to wonder. Because even I wasn't sure if I was asking about stepping into her home, or stepping closer to her heart. Her lips curved into the faintest, reluctant smile. You always do, she whispered. There it was, the crack in her armor. The silence after that was louder than words could ever be. Her gaze held mine for a moment too long, her eyes steady but vulnerable, and I felt the pull between us tighten. It wasn't physical yet, it was something deeper, something neither of us dared to name. I leaned back against the couch, watching her, waiting. And though she looked away, I could see the truth in the way her fingers curled against her lap, restless, betraying the calm mask she tried to wear. That night, we didn't need more words. The silence was its own language, daring both of us to admit what we already knew. And neither of us was ready to break it just yet. The living room felt bigger than it was, not because of its size, but because of the distance she kept between us. She had chosen the armchair by the window, straight-backed, proper, as though the chair itself gave her an excuse to hold her composure. I sat on the couch, a few feet away, though in my chest it felt like miles. The lamplight beside her flickered against the curve of her face, highlighting the quiet strength in her posture. She folded her arms across her chest, almost like armor, and kept her chin lifted. But every so often, her eyes betrayed her, drifting toward me when she thought I wouldn't notice. I tried to make her laugh. Nothing heavy, nothing sharp, just small talk, observations, even a memory or two about my clumsy attempts at fixing the leaky faucet in the hallway earlier that week. Her lips twitched into a smile once or twice, and when she did laugh, it was soft, unguarded. But just as quickly she pulled it back, retreating into silence as though joy itself was too dangerous to hold. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, closing the space not with my body but with my presence. My voice dropped lower, gentler, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile balance between us. You don't have to pretend with me, I murmured. Her eyes flickered to mine, then away. She pressed her lips together and fiddled with the sleeve of her cardigan. The fabric slipped between her fingers, twisted, tugged, like she needed the texture to anchor her. It was such a small gesture, but it said more than words ever could. I wanted to reach out, to still her restless hands with mine, but I held back. Not yet. Not while the line between us was still drawn so carefully. You think I'm pretending? She asked at last, her voice quiet but steady. I gave a small shrug. I think you're guarding yourself. That made her laugh, not a carefree laugh, but a sharp, almost nervous one. And you're not? She asked, tilting her head, her gaze piercing in a way that made me feel seen, maybe more than I wanted to admit. For a moment, the roles reversed. I was the one caught off guard, the one whose defenses slipped. I looked down at my hands, rubbing my thumb against my palm, and let out a slow breath. Maybe I am, I admitted. The silence that followed was different this time. Not empty, just heavy. Full. I glanced up again, and her eyes were already on me. We didn't look away. There was something unspoken there, something that hovered just out of reach, like the faint hum of a song you couldn't quite remember the lyrics to. I leaned back slightly, giving her space, though every part of me wanted to close the distance. She shifted in her chair, her body turning ever so slightly toward me, a movement so subtle it might have gone unnoticed, except I noticed everything about her. The boundaries were still there. But they were thinner now. Softer. And I knew, if either of us took just one step closer, they'd begin to break. I don't remember when I moved closer, whether it was deliberate or instinctive, but suddenly the distance between us wasn't so wide anymore. The armchair she'd chosen, her fortress, sat only a few steps from the couch. And without thinking, I shifted, leaning forward, then sliding across the cushions until I was close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her presence. She noticed. Of course she noticed. Her eyes flicked toward me, and for a heartbeat, I expected her to pull back, to straighten her posture and put me in my place with a sharp word. But she didn't. She stayed where she was, though her breathing grew shallower, the faint rise and fall of her chest giving her away. I let the moment stretch, teasing the air between us. You know, I said quietly, my voice dipped in playfulness but steady at its core. You never answered me back at the door. Her brows arched, her lips twitching into the faintest hint of a smile. Answered what? You know what? I murmured, leaning just a little closer, my shoulder angling toward her. She shook her head, exhaling through her nose, a soft laugh slipping free despite her best effort to hold it back. You're impossible. And yet, I said, smiling, you didn't push me away. The air felt warmer now, charged with something unsaid. Our knees nearly touched, just a breath of space between them, and it was absurd how much I felt it, how much I wanted that space gone. She glanced down, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, but it slipped forward again, brushing against her cheek. Before I could stop myself, I reached out. My fingers moved gently, carefully, tucking the loose strand behind her ear. The moment my skin grazed hers, soft, warm, electric, I felt her breath catch. Not loud, not dramatic, just the smallest shift, but it carried more weight than 1,000 words. Her eyes met mine then, wide and uncertain, but she didn't pull away. I lingered there for a moment, my hand hovering close to her cheek, not touching but close enough to feel the heat rising from her skin. Every instinct screamed at me to close the gap, to let my hand rest against her face, to lean forward and erase the tension that hung between us. But I didn't. Because the power wasn't in what I did, it was in what I didn't do. She swallowed hard, her throat moving gently, and her lips parted like she was about to speak. But no words came. Just silence, thick and fragile. You don't make this easy, she whispered at last, her voice barely audible. Neither do you, I answered softly, my thumb brushing the air just above her skin, a ghost of a touch that left us both trembling inside. For a long moment, we stayed like that, caught in the gravity of something neither of us dared name. Her eyes softened, her shoulders loosened, and the fight she carried within her seemed to melt, piece by piece. And though no lines had been crossed, it already felt like we'd stepped into dangerous, beautiful territory, closer than either of us had ever planned to be. The silence between us lingered, heavy but not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that asked to be filled with truth, the kind that made pretenses feel useless. She sat back slightly, her hands resting in her lap now, fingers still fidgeting with the edge of her sleeve. The way the fabric twisted and turned in her grip told me more than any words could. Finally, she exhaled, long and shaky, like she'd been holding her breath for too long. Do you know why I told you not to come here? She asked, her voice low, almost a whisper. I shook my head, though deep down I thought I already knew. Still, I wanted her to say it, to trust me enough to give me her truth. She lifted her gaze, and for the first time tonight, she didn't try to hide behind composure. Her eyes glistened under the lamplight, vulnerable in a way that made my chest ache. Because I'm afraid, she admitted. The words fell between us like fragile glass, delicate and sharp at the same time. Afraid of what? I asked gently. She hesitated, her lips parting, closing again, like the answer was too big to fit into a single sentence. At last, she whispered, afraid of what people would think. Afraid of what I would think of myself. Afraid of letting you too close, and finding out I can't let you go. Her voice cracked on that last part, and she quickly turned her head, as though she'd revealed too much. I didn't rush to respond. Instead, I let her words sink into the quiet room, let her confession breathe without being smothered by quick reassurances. Then, slowly, I leaned forward and reached for her hand. Her fingers were cold when I first touched them, stiff as though ready to pull away. But when my palm settled around hers, warm, steady, deliberate, she stilled. I didn't say anything at first. I just let my thumb brush across the back of her hand, slow and gentle, grounding her. I felt her inhale sharply, and her shoulders trembled before settling, the tension slipping away in tiny fragments. When she finally looked at me again, there were tears shining in her eyes, but they didn't fall. She let them stay there, unashamed. "I don't want to hurt you," she whispered. "You won't," I said softly, squeezing her hand just enough for her to feel the certainty in me. "You couldn't, even if you tried." Her lips curved into the smallest, almost broken smile, and in that moment, I knew we'd crossed into something deeper than playful words or teasing glances. This was real, raw, messy, terrifying. But it was also the beginning of trust. She didn't pull her hand away. In fact, her fingers shifted, lacing through mine with the gentlest movement, like she'd been waiting for permission all along. The room felt different now, warmer, as though her honesty had changed the very air we breathed. And as I held her hand in mine, I realized the greatest confession of all wasn't in the words she'd spoken. It was in the fact that she'd let me touch her, and hadn't let go. The weight of her hand in mine was enough to change everything. It wasn't just touch, it was permission, fragile but real. And I held on to it as though it was the most precious thing I'd ever been given. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The radio hummed softly in the background, the kettle in the kitchen long forgotten. The world outside felt far away, irrelevant. All that existed was the warmth of her fingers laced through mine, and the quiet storm building in the space between us. She shifted slightly in her chair, and without thinking, I leaned closer. Not too close, just enough that the gap between us shrank into something unbearable. I could see the small details now, the faint line of worry etched between her brows, the curve of her lashes when she blinked, the way her chest rose and fell in uneven rhythm. Her eyes lifted to meet mine, and for a moment, it felt like the air disappeared. We were caught, suspended, as though something greater than either of us was holding us there. I moved first, just a fraction, leaning in until our foreheads almost touched. The closeness sent a rush through me, and I could feel the warmth of her breath mingling with mine. She didn't pull back. In fact, I swore I saw her lean forward ever so slightly, her lips parting as though on the edge of words she couldn't say. "You make it hard to resist," she whispered. Her voice was unsteady, trembling not from weakness but from the force of everything she was holding back. I closed my eyes for a moment, just breathing her in, letting her confession seep into me. My thumb stroked the back of her hand in slow, steady circles, grounding both of us. "Then don't," I murmured. Her breath caught. I felt it, saw it, in the tiny tremor that ran through her shoulders. For one reckless second, I thought she might close the distance. That she might let go of all the fears, all the reasons, and simply let herself want me. But she didn't. Instead, she stayed frozen in that fragile almost, her forehead brushing mine, her hand gripping mine tighter, her lips so close I could feel the ghost of them in the air, but never closing the gap. The restraint was maddening, but it was also beautiful. Because it wasn't indifference holding her back, it was care. Fear, yes, but also reverence. She wasn't ready to break the rules she had lived by for so long, and I wasn't about to be the one to shatter her defenses before she chose it herself. So I stayed there with her, breathing her in, feeling the warmth of her skin pressed to mine, letting the tension coil tight around us until it hummed like a secret only we could hear. And in that suspended moment, neither kiss nor distance, I realized something profound. Sometimes, the most powerful intimacy isn't in what we do, but in what we hold back. The moment held us prisoner. Our foreheads touched, our hands entwined, our breaths mingling in that fragile space where desire teeters on the edge of surrender. I could feel her heart racing beneath the stillness, the pulse of someone torn between fear and longing. And then, slowly, she let go, not of me, but of the battle she'd been fighting inside herself all night. Her shoulders slumped, the tension draining from her body as she leaned into me. Not a surrender of control, but a surrender of weight. Her cheek rested against my chest, and I felt the warmth of her skin through the thin fabric of my shirt. The steady rhythm of her heartbeat pressed against me, gradually slowing, syncing with mine as though our bodies had found a quiet truce. I slipped my arm around her shoulders, pulling her closer. My touch was careful, reverent, but certain. My hand rubbed gentle circles along her back, not to push or persuade, but to comfort, to let her know that she was safe here. That I wasn't asking for more than she was ready to give. She sighed against me, and the sound was soft, tired, almost relieved. "You make me forget myself," she whispered, her voice muffled by the closeness. I tilted my head down, my chin brushing lightly against her hair. "Then maybe you don't need to remember so much," I murmured back. Her laugh was quiet, shaky, but real. The kind of laugh that carried more honesty than she'd ever allowed herself to show before. I felt her hand shift, releasing mine only to rest lightly against my side. Her fingers curled into the fabric there, holding me, not tightly, not desperately, just enough to anchor herself in the reality of this moment. We stayed like that for a long while, wrapped in silence that was no longer heavy but warm, like a blanket drawn around us. The outside world, its judgments and expectations, seemed far away. Here, in the circle of each other's arms, none of it mattered. "I don't know where this leads," she admitted at last, her voice hushed, vulnerable. "Neither do I," I answered truthfully. "But we don't have to know tonight. Tonight, all that matters is this." I gave her a gentle squeeze, my thumb brushing against her shoulder, and felt her body relax further against me. For once, she didn't argue. She didn't put up walls or remind me of the rules she thought should exist. She just let herself be. When she finally pulled back, her eyes lifted to mine, softer than I'd ever seen them. There was no finality in them, no fear pressing her away. Only a quiet promise, unspoken but undeniable, this wasn't the end. I smiled, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. My fingers lingered just briefly against her temple, a touch light as a whisper. "We'll figure it out," I said. She nodded, and for the first time, she didn't look uncertain. She looked at peace. And in that still, fragile moment, with her leaning against me and my heart still thundering from everything left unsaid, I knew this wasn't just the beginning of a story. It was the beginning of us. 20.